Hey, thanks for listening to Conversation 2. Now, I have a lot of points to talk about from this conversation. You know, some conversations, because they're natural and spontaneous, they have more points that I want to break down, and some have less. But this conversation has a lot. So, let's go. All right, so first of all, I asked Chuck whether I should say stunt woman, stunt man, stunt person, stunt professional. So, the English language is changing, and in general, we're trying to be very gender friendly. So the new and supposedly better way of saying things is to remove any gender. Like, don't say stunt woman, stunt man, just say stunt person, right? So just like other words like flight attendant, it could be a man or a woman. But before, several years ago, we used to say steward for a man and stewardess for a woman. So I think it's really interesting how the language is changing based on people's ideas of fairness. So Chuck says the PC term is stunt person. PC means politically correct, but people often just say PC to abbreviate. Politically correct is, it means it's not going to offend someone, hopefully. Okay, that sounds like the coolest job in the world. I say this to Chuck. I emphasize the very heavily. Why? Because it shows that I'm emphasizing the idea that it's really, really cool. There are many ways that you can emphasize your idea or stress that you think something is very cool. You could say very, really, 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 very, very, very. Or you could say the coolest job in the world. Really emphasize the. All right, next. He says, I have a strong martial arts background. What do you have a strong background in? If you've studied something or you have experience working in a certain field, then you have a strong background in that field. He says, this is the coolest job ever. So Chuck really emphasizes the word ever, which is another way to stress your meaning. And a lot of people ask me how to use the word ever. Well, this is one example of how to use the word ever to emphasize your idea. So let me hear you say it. This is the coolest job ever. Okay, awesome. Next, then I talked to that guy who was an up-and-coming director. Up-and-coming is an interesting phrase, meaning right now, or at the time of the story taking place, the director was not famous, but he was on his way to becoming famous. So up and coming means that the person is gaining popularity very quickly. Just come and train. That's what Chuck is saying that the stunt person told him. Just come and train. So just is another word that a lot of people ask me about. When, why, how do we use just? It's like when you want to say simply, don't think about it. It's simple. Just come and train, okay? It takes time. Maybe you know this one, but to take time is a really good phrase to use. How long does it take? Oh, it takes time. It's different for everybody. Some people ask me, what's the difference between everybody and everyone? Well, to be honest, there's no difference. You can use everybody, you can say everyone, and it really means the same thing. Just whatever you feel is more comfortable to say. They'll nail it. I love this phrase. To nail it means to get something perfectly. So to do something just right. Let me hear you say it. They'll nail it. Okay, great. You nailed it. They go about it systematically. To go about something systematically is to do it with great order and organization. You have a system. You're not just waking up and thinking, okay, well, I'll do this and this, whatever I feel like. You have a system. Next, professional headshots. What are headshots? Headshots are pictures of your head. So if you are interested in acting or modeling or anything like that, then you should know what a headshot is. Chuck says they build themselves up. What does it mean to build yourself up? So it means to work and little by little to become better and better. Chuck says, I already had a background in it. I'm talking about fight choreography. So that ended up being my specialty. So we talked a little bit about what it means to have a background in something. You have some knowledge, skill, or training. And ended up, we talked about before as well, so it's good to review. Ended up being my specialty. That means Chuck wasn't planning on having combat action scenes be his specialty, but it just so happened that it ended up being his specialty. Chuck says, you know what? To be honest, this is a great way to fill in between speakers. You know what? To be honest, this is when you're going to say something that might be surprising, might be interesting, it might be, you know, something you don't usually share with people, but it's a great phrase to use. So I want to hear you say it. You know what? To be honest. All right, great. You're going to get yourself in a pickle. So I say to Chuck, you're going to get yourself in a pickle. To get yourself in a pickle means to have a problem. It's a really fun idiom. Let me hear you say it. To be in a pickle. Okay, let me hear you say, I'm in a pickle. Great, that means you have a problem. I hope not. I hope you're not in a pickle. And then Chuck says, I can tell you the first time. So I can tell you is a really good phrase to use in between thoughts or to begin your sentence, to introduce your sentence. So let me hear you say it. I can tell you. Good. Okay, next, I can't imagine. I say it, I can't imagine, because I'm showing my surprise, right? So this is another really great phrase to use to introduce your surprise about something. So let me hear you say it. I can't imagine. Now, emphasis is really important. So put some oomph into it, some feeling. I can't imagine. Okay, great. My brain is not working today. So in this conversation, I had a little difficulty remembering my favorite quote. So I tell Chuck, my brain is not working today. And so that's something you could say, you know, if you want to explain that you're a little embarrassed that you can't remember something. But I can share another. So I can share. It's not really necessary to say I can share, but just like Chuck said, I can tell you, it's another great way to introduce your idea. So let me hear you say it. I can share. Great. Okay. I say it can be scary to put yourself out there. To put yourself out there means to expose yourself to some kind of risk. You know, to take a chance, to take a risk, and sometimes it's necessary to put yourself out there in order to try, right? So that's what this phrase means. In terms of what you said, so in terms of is a way of saying specifically. So in terms of weather, Miami is really nice. So when you're zeroing in on a specific topic, like in terms of this topic, in terms of weather, you can use this phrase, in terms of. Let me hear you say it, in terms of. Good. Okay. People can get really worked up over the fear of things. So to get worked up over something is to get excited but anxious. So excited in kind of a bad way. Worked up about something means that you're fretting or you're worried about it. So you don't really want to be worked up over things. It means you're unnecessarily worried, okay? Freakouts. You freak out. Freak out means similarly, to get worked up over something. To freak out means to have a very strong reaction. Maybe you get angry, maybe you get maybe you yell or cry or you have some very extreme reaction. That's to freak out. So it's a very common slang that we use. Okay, worst case scenario. Worst case scenario means the worst thing that could possibly happen. So what do you think is the worst thing that could possibly happen? That's the worst case scenario. Let me hear you say it. Worst case scenario. Great. And some people, I think, especially British English speakers, will say scenario. So you might hear that as well. Now, everyone has enough strength to do a standing backflip. So I think this phrase is interesting because of the structure. Everyone has enough strength to do something. So do you have enough time to have a coffee with me? Do you have enough money to take a vacation? So enough blah blah to blah blah. I just like the structure of that, so I thought you would like to focus on that. 3 more. People will get tied up in. To get tied up in is sort of to be wrapped up in. It's another similar idiom or phrasal verb. When you're tied up in something, it means you're busy, you're preoccupied. Okay, freeze. To freeze is when you don't move. Okay, you stop speaking, you stop moving. There is no movement, nothing. What can you freeze? A person can freeze. You can say freeze, meaning stop. A bank account can be frozen. They will freeze your account. The bank will freeze your account if they suspect any fraudulent activity. So freeze is not just for ice. And word. Chuck says word at the end of this conversation. It's kind of funny. It's not super common, but a lot of times we use word to agree with someone. So it's fun. If you want to play around with different ways to agree with someone and you want to sound like a, modern, young, cool person, you can say word. So that's the last phrase I wanted to break down in lesson 2. So next, let's listen to conversation 3. All right, I'll see you there.